is, there you go. Okay.
Yeah.
So that's recording. And now, Andrew, you wanted to, let's see.
I texted Katie to
share.
add him as a co-host.
I've got it. I made it so all participants can share. So everybody else behave.
There we go. It should be sharing now, correct?
I don't.
Not yet.
Not yet.
Let me double check nobody else is sharing right now, so it should work.
It says I am, but I guess I just have my own show.
Interesting. That's a new one.
I can try again real quick to see if I can do it. For some reason, I wasn't able to show.
Alyssa, I wonder if this is a Katie setting if our breakout panel cannot share. Master setting.
Well, I'm double checking real quick here.
Okay, sorry.
That's okay.
Because I think we can share. And then welcome everyone who's stepped on in. We're just getting started. So if you give us a split second and then we'll get going. Perfect.
Okay, we're all good.
And then Celia, could you just check that you are able to forward your slide?
See if I can do. Can you see my slide?
I believe so. I believe you are sharing right now.
And it's, oh my gosh.
There we
Okay.
go.
Does it work?
Yeah, it's working great.
Wow. Thank you. That's good to know. Okay.
Awesome. And thank you, Alyssa.
Alrighty. And when do I start?
You can start now.
Oh, great. Okay. Thank you. This has been a crazy morning. I'm so delighted to be here, though. I'm Celia Nightingale, the Small Business Liaison for the Department of Labor and Industries. For most of my career, however, I've been a small business advisor, trainer, and program director. And additionally, I'm co-owner with my husband of a small business, and I'm an investor in two others. From my experience, I'm very aware of the incredible demands on business owners. They can be overwhelming. My goal here is to give you a quick overview of what you need to know and do, and provide contacts and resources for further information and assistance. So here is my agenda. I'm going to start with whoops, I didn't advance it. Okay, here's my agenda. I'm going to start with major employment laws, then to payroll-related requirements, general best practices, and finally, where you can access additional resources. It's a lot to cover, and I won't be able to get into the details here, but I'll give you what I can in our half hour together. And my colleague, Andrew Bryan, the Assistant Small Business Liaison, will be addressing any questions you may have along the way through the chat. While I'm talking about your responsibilities as an employer, I also hope this helps to build your leadership strength. Your employees will want to have confidence that you're treating them and their coworkers fairly, that you know your requirements, and that you operate in compliance with the law. Have you ever worked for some place where that's not the case? I know I have, and it definitely was not a good place to work. All right, so starting here with some employment laws. There are others, but these represent the major ones. As a long-term business advisor, I've known many business owners who weren't aware of some of these, or who thought that they didn't apply to them for some reason. With very few exceptions, these kick on with even one part-time or even a temporary employee. Let's start with who are your employees. It's not uncommon for small businesses to engage independent contractors, but many of those contractors don't actually meet the federal or state requirements and would be considered employees by regulators. There's a lot of misunderstanding here. It doesn't matter how many hours they work for you, how much they earn, or what you call them. If they don't pass the independent contractor test, you're required to consider them employees, follow employment laws, and put them on your payroll. There's no such thing in labor law as a 1099 employee or an exemption because you paid them less than $600. That may be accountant or IRS speak, but not labor law. I've seen some cases where accountants have misinformed their clients, in part because accountants tend to be focused on federal tax requirements, and the IRS isn't as strict about independent contractors as other state and federal agencies. The IRS test is a weighing of the evidence, but state law requires that an independent contractor engagement meet all parts of the independent contractor test. If it fails even one, that person is in fact considered your employee. Misclassification errors can be very costly. Believe me, I've seen the assessments. This slide shows a guide that can help you determine whether your individuals meet the state's independent contractor test or whether they would be considered your employees. I've also listed parts of the test on the slide. If you don't want to hire someone as an independent contractor, or if you don't want to hire someone as an employee, consider another legal option, hiring them through a temporary employment agency like Manpower, Express Employment Services, Kelly Services, etc. That's often possible. And in fact, my husband and I employed my son for a period of time using that method. Minimum wage. This slide speaks pretty well for itself. Washington's minimum wage increases from $13.69 to $14.49 per hour in 2022 and is adjusted every year based on inflation. Seattle and SeaTac have higher minimums, and they apply if your employees are working in those cities, even if your business isn't based there. Regarding tips, many states allow you to factor in worker tips to meet minimum wage, but not in Washington. Tips must be added to a worker's wages of at least $13.69 per hour now, and soon to be $14.49. Overtime pay of 1.5 times an employee's regular rate of pay is required for all hours over 40 in a work week. You can't give an employee a day off next week for overtime this week, even if they prefer it. Who's exempt from overtime pay requirements? The state's rules changed significantly in 2020. In order to consider someone overtime exempt or salaried exempt, their job has to meet a duties test and their salary must meet a minimum. That minimum is changed and will be changing every year based on the announced minimum wage. And for the next several years, on an escalating multiple of that minimum wage. In 2022, the minimum exempt salary will be 1.75 times the minimum wage, which calculates to $52,744 per year. The multiple is being raised gradually over time until it reaches 2.5 in 2028. From then forward, the minimum exempt salary will be 2.5 times that year's minimum wage. So with very few exceptions, as described in the law, no one can be considered exempt from overtime pay requirements unless their job meets a duties test, they're paid a salary, and that salary in 2028 and beyond must be at least 2.5 times the minimum wage. And by the way, that's expected to be about $85,000 a year in 2028. Youth employment. There are strict rules around employing people under 18. Here are some of them. One question I've been asked during this COVID period is if the parent school authorization form is still required if kids are attending school virtually from home. And the answer is yes, it is. Break and meal periods. This slide describes required breaks and meal periods. In an era of texting and social media, many employees would prefer to get intermittent breaks rather than a dedicated 10 or 15-minute chunk of time. If you choose to allow that, a best practice is to get the employee's preference in writing and to have a statement on your timesheets where employees acknowledge that they took their breaks. You may want to also include language regarding employee meal periods. What you don't want is for an employee to later say they're due back overtime pay because they didn't get breaks or meal periods as required by law, when you assume they did. There you go. Equal employment opportunity. Federal and state law provide for protections against discrimination in employment. While the state's Human Rights Commission doesn't investigate issues with super small employers, those with fewer than 8 employees, a best practice is to operate your business in full compliance regardless, so that your employees see you as conscientious, inclusive, and fair. Equal Pay and Opportunities Act. This law makes it illegal to pay different wages to men and women if they perform substantially equal work. And it includes provisions to prevent historic pay inequities from affecting future pay. You're required to set someone's pay based on the range of the job you're hiring for, not what they've historically been earning. And in fact, it's not legal to ask for past salary history. It's also not legal to have a policy against employees sharing salary information with each other. If there are pay differences between men and women in your business, a best practice is to eliminate them or be ready to show why the differences are appropriate. Acceptable reasons include differences in education, training, experience, seniority, work performance, and regional cost of living. Safety and health. This is a very important slide. Many small businesses don't know that it's not enough to just provide a safe workplace. Every business or nonprofit must take specific actions, whether they're in heavy construction or they're a web design firm. It starts with creating a written safety program, which will include identifying hazards, setting up practices and procedures, and providing regular employee safety training. Even if all your employees are working quietly on their own computers at home or on your computers at home. There are literally hundreds of safety rules. There's no way you could know them or how many of them apply to your business. A best practice is to schedule a free consultation with a specialist from the Department of Labor and Industries. During a safety and health consultation, you can't get cited for any violations the consultant identifies, though you will be required to correct issues if they're found. But that's a whole lot better than later getting cited and fined for something you weren't even aware of. Did you know that anyone, your employees, your former employees, your customers, your competitors, can go on LNI's website and file an anonymous safety and health complaint? And LNI is required to investigate and to cite and fine for any violations they find. This isn't a regulatory area where they can give warnings first. The Federal Occupational Safety and Health Administration is very strict about that, and LNI administers both federal OSHA as well as Washington safety laws. During this COVID pandemic, LNI is receiving lots of extra complaints. Emergency rules with COVID do allow for a warning, but just for COVID-specific violations, masks, social distancing, etc. If they find other violations, those will invariably be cited. Work-related injuries. You're required to cover your employees and some independent contractors for workers' compensation insurance through the Department of Labor and Industries. Workers' comp covers medical costs, wage replacement, and potentially vocational services and other things if a person is injured on the job. As an employer, you need to maintain a workers' comp account with LNI, give a fair description of the type of work your employees are doing to ensure they're classified for insurance purposes appropriately, keep good time records, and report and pay premiums to LNI each quarter. If an employee is injured, you'll want to urge them to get medical care. Additionally, you'll want to participate in helping them return to work as soon as medically appropriate, potentially with part-time or light duty assignments. That's for your employees' well-being, as well as for keeping your rates down. You definitely don't want to retaliate against them for filing a claim or to pay for their medical treatment out of pocket to avoid a claim. Those are illegal practices. Employee leaves. Washington is one of just a few states that has a paid sick leave law and paid family and medical leave requirements. Make sure you know them. A best practice with sick leave is to have written employment policies in place to give yourself the ability to require doctor's notes for employee absences longer than 3 days, and to require prior notice of employee plans to use sick leave for scheduled things, like doctor's appointments and elective surgeries for themselves and their dependents. And by the way, LNI has samples of those policies on its website. Sick leave can be used when employees, gosh, sick leave can be used when employees need to care for kids if schools or daycares are closed by health authorities, and for employees needing to take actions related to addressing domestic violence. If you choose to merge sick leave and vacation leave into one pot of paid time off, or PTO, be clear that the state's rules around sick leave may then apply to all of that time, including the requirement that you can't wipe out accruals at year end. You have to allow employees to carry over at least 40 hours if they've accrued it. With Washington paid family and medical leave, small employers don't have to share the cost, but they're responsible for deducting premiums from employee paychecks and remitting them quarterly to the Employment Security Department. Isolated worker protections. This is a relatively new law. There are now special requirements for protection of employees in certain industries who are working alone. It's in order to keep them safe. A sexual harassment policy, special trainings, and panic buttons are required. Here are some other relatively new laws that limit an employer's ability to restrict an employee's outside earning potential. Non-compete agreements. Those are those agreements stating that your employees or independent contractors can't compete with your business after the relationship with you ends. They're only allowed if the individuals were well paid. Non-discrimination, confidentiality, and non-solicitation agreements aren't affected by this law. They are permitted. Workplace posters. There are a number of required posters. Here's a link to a publication that tells you about various posters and how to get them. All the posters are free, so don't get fooled by mailings that say you need to buy them. Many workplace posters don't have the classic lunchroom or other gathering places to post the posters. A best practice is to mail or email them to your staff, keeping record that you did so, and then re-email them annually or when there are new updates. Now on to payroll-related requirements. There are many employer requirements related to payroll, and we'll briefly go over through this list. Lots of employers have accountants or payroll services handling these things, and that's likely good. As a business owner, you should put your majority of your time where needed to maximize your company's long-term success. But be clear, you still need to know this stuff. You're ultimately responsible for following the requirements. I've seen plenty of cases where a business owner's lack of knowledge and attention has proven to bring bad news because the accountant missed something or never agreed to do it in the first place. Here are some pay-related requirements. Employee timesheets are very important. That third small bullet, which refers to workers' compensation insurance risk classification, may be unfamiliar to some of you. Some employers have multiple risk classes assigned by L&I, which requires tracking employee activities more closely. For example, painters may do indoor painting some days and more dangerous outdoor painting on other days, using high ladders on less stable ground. Painting companies will pay a higher rate for workers' compensation insurance for the outdoor time. If they don't have timesheets clearly showing what time their staff worked where, they'll be required to pay the higher risk class cost for all hours, a difference of $2.75 per hour per worker. There's a lot to know about pay here. A best practice is to go to the website noted, read it, and ensure you understand it. If you don't, ask questions. You'll find contact information for someone who can help you through the website or use other resources. I'll show you at the end. Hiring forms and processes. When you hire someone, whether for an afternoon or forever, there are many required forms that you're responsible for obtaining, retaining, and in some cases, transmitting. Rather than give you bunches of different websites, I encourage you to go to the Washington Small Business Guide at business.wa.gov. You'll find the information you need there, plus links for required forms and actions. In addition to forms and actions at hire, there are regular taxes to pay and filings to make. This slide addresses federal tax withholdings required from paychecks and quarterly filings and payments. There are also some annual filings, such as the federal unemployment tax reports and W-2s. There are also state taxes and withholdings required from paychecks and quarterly filings and payments. But again, you don't need to remember this. Instead, go here. This is the PDF version of the Washington Small Business Guide at business.wa.gov. Specifically, this is the payroll chapter. I clipped some of a chart from it where you'll see the payroll requirements, purpose, action, and agency involved. And it includes all the hyperlinks you could ever want in order to access needed information or forms. Record keeping. With payroll, lots of records are required. You could be audited for taxes or investigated for equal pay, wage complaints, or other allegations by federal and state, and in a few cases, local agencies. So you'll want to ensure that you have the records the agency may ask for. When you don't have what's requested, it usually doesn't go well. In the absence of documentation, most employment laws are written to take the word of an employee over that of an employer, or to make high estimates that are more costly to the employer than what actuals might have been. I've mentioned a few employer best practices as I've moved through my slides, but here are some others. It's smart to have a personnel policy handbook, even for very small employers. A few basic policies are particularly important to include. That employment is at will, meaning there's no guarantee of future employment. That you're committed to equal opportunity, anti-discrimination, and anti-harassment. That your employees are not allowed to work overtime without advance permission. And you might want to provide instruction for what employees should do if they can't come to work or can't come on time. You'll want to include safety and health policies that set a foundation for a work culture where your employees know that you take safety seriously, and others. Performance appraisal. Employees want feedback, ideally more positive than negative, and always constructive with an emphasis on the future. Most employees want to advance and want an understanding of what's required for them to do so. Most employees want benefits. They have broader needs than just a wage. And an employee's longevity with the company is often tied to the full compensation package. Unfortunately, this is an area where small businesses sometimes lose valued employees to big ones that can often provide multiple benefits. But there are other tools that small businesses can offer and can be helpful for employee retention, including the next two items: flexible scheduling and options for remote work. We've learned some things during this COVID period about what's possible on that front. Resources. So I've covered a lot here, and if you're like me, you'll retain only a portion. So keep this slide deck to remind you of the topics, and you'll also have the links for more information. Here again is shown the Washington Small Business Guide in PDF fashion, available at business.wa.gov. And you'll see the different section names on the right: plan your business, start your business, payroll, open, run, grow, and close. And here is the same thing in HTML, the HTML version that's available right through the guide, the business.wa.gov as well. Here's a page from the Grow Your Business chapter, and it details lots related to hiring employees and assorted employment laws. The Run Your Business chapter has details regarding ongoing employment reporting requirements. In addition to the guide, there are wonderful business support resources in Washington, including those listed on the Economic Alliance's website. You'll see SCORE, the Washington Center for Women in Business, and the Small Business Development Center there. Their business advising and training programs that are either free or very low cost. Their advisors should know the answers to many of your questions, or certainly be able to connect you with other resources who could. And finally, you're always welcome to contact me and Andrew Bryan, who's hopefully answering your questions on the chat right now. Here is my personal email address, and then the address for the small business team at LNI. I'm so glad that you attended this resiliency workshop, what Washington employers need to know. And I know you wouldn't have taken the time if you didn't take your role as an employer or manager very seriously. It's my hope that you leave this workshop with enough information to move forward with more knowledge and confidence and enough resources to help you fill in any gaps. It looks like there could be another couple minutes for a few other questions.